So, hey, I'm going to try to make this one a little bit more conversational in a freestyle riff because, usually when I approach these truth bombs, I have a topic in mind. I have sort of a chronology of events that I think I would need to unpack that intersect with what most of us are in the echo chamber 24-hour cycle of reacting to, right? To try to overcome the overwhelming noise that has really just created a discombobulated circus of lobotomized zombies that really can't keep things configured to understand how things work. Okay, and it's like sometimes I laugh at myself because I'm basically these are part sermons, part lectures, part getting to know you, that sort of thing, in an effort because I'm a guy that has the information, and there's a reason I have the information, and I guess where I'm coming from this morning is kind of a confluence of a lot of things that are happening at the same time, as we all are, right? So, first, I want to address. I got tons of comments on my last truth bomb from yesterday. Uh, Many people are saying thank you. Keep bringing the truth. This is the truth. Oh my God, where have you been? I am so appreciative of you. You know, being bold enough, I guess, to be able to bring these truths to the public. And for that, I am equally grateful to you for letting me know how you feel. Because if we cannot connect together, then this is all for naught. And I just am desperately trying to grow a sort of consortium, if you will, a symphony of trust, where I overcome the noise, where I'm a relatively unknown guy, that people are like, you got to listen to this guy, and hopefully that spreads, because what I'm telling you is the ultimate truth, the most important truth of our times. Now, in the ratio, of course, you're going to get a lot of trolls. You're going to get a lot of people who want to discount your credibility. They don't like what you have to say. Maybe it's not fitting in with whatever their schematic is, and true to form, based on yesterday's, I'd say, almost tidal wave of people saying thank you for everything that you're doing. There's about, let's say, an 8-to-2 ratio of positive to negative, where some people are kind of like, yeah, dude, you had me until you started talking about climate change. And I started thinking about this, and I wanted to address this from the standpoint that, first of all, if you were to know me in my personal life and where I've come from, I mean, I've said this in former truth bombs, but people are catching up every day. So, maybe you're just seeing me for the first time. My name's Patrick Lovell. I'm a television producer. I'm a film producer. I'm an investigative journalist. I'm a muckraking journalist. I was born in '68, which was a very revolutionary time. A lot of incredibly insane things happening at that time between the assassinations of Martin Luther King and, of course, John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, and then the Vietnam War and everything that led to, that goes up to, that era kind of culminates with Watergate, and then we move on from that forward to basically build the 80s and everything that came since. Um, I'm a guy who has incredible aspiration. I'm very ambitious. I'm also very independent, and I'm very free-willed. So I studied political science. I've always understood power, probably as well as anyone, quite frankly. And I chose not to go and follow my footsteps of my dad, who was a corporate attorney. He was an executive. He was a professional, a consummate professional. And we came up in the oil and gas industry. So I understood the miracle of, quite frankly, oil and gas. And I understand the flip side of oil and gas because I went to college and I know a thing or two. I have insatiable curiosity, first and foremost. I'm always asking questions. And what I love about the internet, and I'm middle aged now, is that I can find pretty much anything I want. And I have, the ability to think critically. So I can, go down a pathway until I realize it doesn't make sense. Or I can go down a pathway where it just boggles my mind. And so I find myself interested in, physics, in astronomy, and chemistry, and quite frankly, tech, and a whole other, a lot of things that I'm actually interested in, but particularly systems, because, like I said, I studied political science, but instead of following in my dad's footsteps and going on to corporate law, I wound up in Hollywood because I wanted to become a producer. I wanted to make films. And so I had the opportunity to work for some of the biggest name executive producers in Hollywood, and I learned the systemology of power and how things flow and money. I've been around big money for a long time. And big money operates, quite frankly, a lot differently than everybody's personal, checkbook, or I should say, the way they manage their own household, right? So I've seen a whole great sort of strata, if you will, of life. I'm not a young man, as you can tell by the gray, and I've been around the block. Primarily growing up, my interest was I'm an athlete. I love music. I've always been pretty much an A minus kind of extreme sports kind of guy. I mean, I love to surf. I love to snowboard. I love to mountain climb. I love to mountain bike. And a perfect day for me, for example, would be I'd wake up in the morning. I'd go do yoga on the beach in Malibu, surf a couple of waves, go to a freaking coffee shop, and then head down to Sunset, take a couple of meetings, hopefully put together some freaking major deals. And I'd be, of course, driving my Tesla, right? And, and then I'd go to my cool crib and hang out and hopefully have a couple of cocktails and listen to things like fucking Van Halen on my porch watching the sunset. I don't know. But why do I tell you that? Because that kind of lifestyle, honestly, I'd look a hell of a lot better than I do because I'd be fucking rich and powerful and I'd have my shit together and I wouldn't be chasing a lot of stuff, right? Now, as a producer, I'm an entrepreneur. So I've been riding this like up and down, up and down, up and down most of my career. There's been times where I've been top of my game. So I came out of Hollywood, in the 90s, working for big guys. I was a small fish in a big pond. But then I became a big fish in a small pond. And I ran, a famous festivals production, and I got to do, work with some of the biggest names in Hollywood from my era and the era before. I mean, huge, huge, huge names. I mean, everybody from like Robert Redford to Meryl Streep to Kevin Costner to, quite frankly, Jennifer Aniston and Keanu Reeves, to name a few. Now, would those guys all know me? No, I basically was a producer doing stuff in entertainment that they were promoting, and I, got to be around the greats, and then I churned out product for a television show that I produced. Okay, that's one side of my career. I also did unbelievable amounts of action sports programming and production with some of the best talent on the fucking planet. So I've been around greatness, okay, and I understand the greats. Right? Whether they were born with absolute beauty or talent or whatever, but to perform at high levels, okay, to where you have just unbelievable value. It doesn't matter where you come from or what you end up doing. Whether you're some genius that becomes a brain surgeon, or if you're a tech guy and you come up with some great tech that everybody buys, and Steve Jobs, that sort of thing. You're a iconoclast, whatever. I've been around people like that forever, right? And like I said, I'm a competitive and an ambitious guy. My sport has always been football. Football is my favorite sport. I'm a diehard football guy. I'm from Texas. Football was freaking religion growing up, okay? So I love competition, and I love sacrifice, and I love achievement. I love to freaking feel that tingling sensation on the hair on the back of my neck raises when I hear, the Star Spangled Banner being played at the Olympics. When we see the gold medal hoisted, I'm one of those guys. I love that. Skiers, like I love Lindsey Vonn, for example. I loved watching the last Olympics and watching skateboarders because I was a skateboarder growing up. And I'm a football guy, skateboarder guy, high energy. I used to go to punk rock shows. For all you young people, if you happen to look back at videos on YouTube and check out like the Circle Jerks, or I don't know, Suicidal Tendencies, or who was I thinking? Not the Meat Puppets. I was thinking of somebody the other day that just fucking was incredible out of Washington, D.C. I'll come back to it. But anyway, you might see some, or Fear. Check out Fear, on YouTube. I was a guy in the mosh pit, okay? So like if you happen to see Woodstock 99 and they were, Rage Against the Machine was playing and everybody was circle jerking and, screaming, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Yeah, I was that guy. Now, I'm a little bit of a hybrid, right? I'm like, my fundamentals are all about, independence, competition, physicality. Like, for example, growing up, man, I've been into more brawls than I can count. I actually got shot at a couple of times, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, And I'm lucky I'm alive. I mean, I've skied some of the steepest shit in the mountains, and I've dealt with some incredibly scary shit. I used to teach water skiing. I've surfed all over. Look, whatever. This isn't to tell you how great I am. It's just my mentality. I believe in dynamism. I believe in the dream, the river. You got to go somewhere. It's adventure. My company is called the Adventure Corps Productions. That should tell you everything you need to know, right? But I've never reached the A-list. I've always been, I don't know, around it, but I've never actually overcome it. And so I'm not a name that you would see like, I don't know, Tom Cruise or whomever. I mean, those guys are fucking A-list, right? If you remember Entourage, that television show back in the early 2000s, I was living that kind of lifestyle, but I was hanging out basically at the B-list parties opposed to the A-list. Even though I got into the A-list parties, but people would see me around and be like, hey, I know that guy from somewhere. I got my own. So my point is that I'm ambitious. I'm dynamic. I love the idea, quite frankly. Capitalism, the whole notion of capitalism is money makes money. Okay? And so if you have a great idea, you got great tech, you're a brain surgeon, you're an engineer, you're going to create the great next thing. It takes capital to be able to get the infrastructure to carry to market, and then you can do some great things. Okay, I think that's all fucking awesome. Now, what I've never been, and I never will be, is some punk ass bitch deceptive motherfucker that pulls the rug out of everybody to basically backdoor them. Sorry, I got a little bit fired up on that. But I mean, honestly, working in Hollywood and being around the block, and I've been to Manhattan and Chicago and Miami and Texas and whatever. There's plenty of fucking players out there that are just complete rotten motherfuckers, okay? And it's like sometimes you come up, I mean, think, what was the saying back in like the early aughts? It's like, don't hate the player, hate the game, right? So there's a little bit of that going on. But because I have insatiable curiosity and ambition and dynamics, and I studied politics, and the one thing that I understand probably as well as anybody is power and power dynamics. I've been around it. I've seen it. I know what it's like in the real world. I got my goddamn PhD in common sense and power, okay? I did that all by the time I was 40. I'm 53 now, okay? And so for the past 13 years, I've been completely obsessed with trying to get to the bottom of what created the 2008 Great Financial Crisis. Why? Because I knew the world that we lived in before 2008, and now I know the world that we've lived in post 2008. So to address some of these comments, like for example, some people are like, dude, you had me and I'm down with you, but you started talking about climate change, which then it's kind of like this downward cycle, this downward tumble to, it's my guy versus your guy. It's red versus blue. I hate Biden or I hate Trump. And we've all been basically, I don't know, cultivated, crafted to get into this scenario. And see, it pisses me off to no end because, growing up when I did, I'm all about liberty and justice for all. I'm all about freedom. I'm all about see a need, fill a need on the growth side. But I'm also about, I know that life is not a straightforward, perfection model. Nobody's perfect. You have to make a lot of mistakes to find out who you are first and foremost. And you got to be able to surf the river of life. And you got to come up with your own philosophy. And you got to come up with how you fit in the system. And then hopefully you get to where you want to go. You got to have goals. You've got to have vision. But then you have to have execution. And along the way, what happens is, so I never worked for, I worked for giant producers within big corporations, but I really wasn't working for the corporation. I was working for really successful individuals, okay? And when you work for a corporation, for example, there's a lot of politics that are involved. And let's say you go get a business degree, an MBA, you go get, a law degree or a corporate attorney. You got to fit within the form of what that system is. And then you get caught, right? You've got a mortgage, you've got payments, you've got a family to raise, you've got responsibility. So you try to be who you want to be within that system, but you've got to sacrifice to stay within that system to be able to stay consistent enough to be able to build, right? And so the idea in our society is that everybody has to depend on money. And I've said this before in some of my truth bombs, that you can't just go build a house by yourself off the grid and, have your own food, power, access to water, clothing, all of the things that you need to sustain life by yourself. And if you can do that by yourself, you're a badass, much more of a badass than I'll ever be. I don't want to be that guy. Like I said, I'd rather be the guy that has enough money to go, do my yoga in the morning and go surf and then go to a kick-ass meeting in my badass Tesla and then go to my cool house overlooking the ocean and the sunset, listen to Van Halen. That's what would get me fucking jazzed, okay? Or Beastie Boys or the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And, I'd love to hop on my, my freaking, just head up with my friends to go see, I don't know, the concert up in San Francisco or whatever, But, so I'm like that kind of 80s guy. But at the same time, it's like I've been around the block, man, and I've seen it all. I've been to dead shows, I've been this, I've been that, I've been up and down. And I've seen, in the most beguiling and a disgusting aspect of everything that's kind of puked itself up from the system that I'm revealing to you is just like the catastrophic homelessness. There are people that definitely have drug problems and need a lot of help, and they've got mental problems and everything else. And we've had that for decades, okay? If you want to understand certain problems with the mental, challenged population of the United States, I mean, in the 80s, or what am I talking about? 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever. I mean, there was a great movie called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. We had government that helped those types of people with asylums, and I don't even know if that's the appropriate word, but rehab sort of centers and things that were government funded that Reagan ended, and then a lot of people wound up homeless. But the stuff that we're dealing with now, if you go to San Francisco or Los Angeles or San Diego, Salt Lake City, Phoenix, and fucking hot in Phoenix, I don't know how anybody can survive. It's like you don't have the cold, but in Phoenix, if you're homeless, my God, it's like 120 degrees, or Vegas for that matter. And, people are victims of this situation that I'm telling you about. So when you start to contextualize, all of the different information that's out there that comes at us nonstop, like I've got patterns. I'll look at my phone when I wake up in the morning. And yeah, this one guy in my story, if I get on Facebook, might have a picture of glorious like swimsuit models in bikinis in beautiful locations. And yeah, I have a tendency to actually click on it and go, wow, that girl is beautiful, right? Not tattered up. She's not in some fucking strip club, whatever. But it got my attention, okay? And then I'll see somebody's family or somebody doing something great and their kid maybe just got an A on a test, or maybe graduated, going off to the Ivy League. And, and I like to look at stuff like that, because it's personal and people I know and their successes. And then, maybe because I live in a sports community, somebody will post their kid, launching a 70-foot gap jump, and he just like pulled off a new rodeo flip or something like that, a trick, and he's on his way to the Olympics. And I'm like, damn, that's awesome. So all of these incredibly cool things come into your mind and in your sort of bandwidth while you're dealing with all of this shit that I'm talking about. And so it's really hard to get people's attention because we are overwhelmed with information. Now, simultaneously, we're all aware that there's this fucking civil war going on, and it's the Civil War 2022. So far, it's rather tame in comparison to what a real civil war is. Let's hope it doesn't get there. But the bottom line is we've had a cultural war going back to the 60s, right? And I'm definitely on the liberal progressive side when it comes to which is basically a libertarian kind of ideology motif, right? So back in the 80s, anarchy was like a big thing to me, right? I had my skateboard, I was kind of like this punk guy, I'd go do my thing and I didn't want to listen to authority. So I was like, that I found out years later, that's libertarian. And the other side of me, quite frankly, coming from Texas, is I always admired, the Texas Ranger. So these guys were kind of guys that were cowboys that you could see at the bar, they go and get themselves shit ass drunk and their lives weren't perfect and they'd love to drink tequila at the bar and there were characters. But boy, when it came to fucking dealing with business, they were fucking badasses. You send one Texas Ranger to a fucking riot. So those were the kinds of influences that I had, right? I mean, it's I don't know, it's cultural. I love Bugs Bunny. Bugs Bunny is this guy that's like, what's up, Doc? Because he was a wise ass. He knew that fucking everybody was up to no good, and he was going to navigate the world the way he did. That's what I grew up with, right? That's what I thought the American way. That's what separated us from Nazis and Germans and everything that we whooped their fucking ass. And don't you ever think otherwise in World War II. And quite frankly, we did that with the insane sacrifice of our ideological enemy, the communists, Stalin. They lost 25 million people. 20 to 25 million people in World War II. You ever seen footage of the Battle of Stalingrad? Do you have any idea the size and scope of the war between Germany and Russia? I, we lost, I don't even think we lost a total of 1 million troops in World War II, and it was a tremendous sacrifice. A lot of things went our way. We had huge sacrifices, Battle of Guadalcanal, and all the stuff in the Asian theater, and then all the stuff that took place in World War II, and the Battle of the Bulge and everything else. My grandfather was at the Battle of the Bulge, and yeah, we did beat the Nazis, just like we beat the Confederates, and just like we beat the monarchy. So when you look at Patrick Lovell and you want to understand the ideology that I come from, I'm like, live and let live. I'm like, look, you want to go to church on Sundays and you want to, that's, and you want to praise the gospel and you want to be with your clan and you guys are like super tight and you know the fucking world because you speak for God, whatever. Okay, that's great. Go ahead, do your own thing. Okay, so you got to have the same attitude towards the guy who's a fucking drunk that goes into the strip club and he sees the light with a girl dancing on a fucking pole like you see the light for Jesus. Okay, whatever. Live and let live. The difference is when people break the law. Okay? So, for example, we all know, I hope we all know, that priests do not have the right to rape children in their congregation. And if they do, there are laws to put them in prison for doing that. Not to mention the shame for what they did, and also, let's hope they're punished in eternal damnation. That's me. I hope they go to hell and rot in hell for something like that. Same with people that manipulate people behind the scenes or rape people all day long. I hate deceptive motherfuckers that are cowards that use the shadow to basically become predators. That's a human trait. I'm a straightforward dude, man. Like I said, live and let live. Be what you are. Find yourself. If you become a drug addict, I hope you find therapy downstream. Same with alcoholism, whatever. Humans are humans. We're never going to be perfect. But there are laws and there are degrees of laws. And so in a free society, if you break the law, you go to prison or jail or, some sort of rehab situation or whatever the case is. I mean, we all know that, right? So what's this have to do with why someone might say something about you had me until you started talking about climate change? Well, I'm not trying to change people's minds who don't believe in climate change. Quite frankly, if you don't believe in climate change, I just put you in a category, a bucket that's like the same type of people that were living in the 1100s that thought the earth was flat, right? Or before that. It's easy to understand why you might think the earth is flat when it looks flat, but it wasn't flat. And we ended up understanding through science and observable data, what makes reality. And hopefully, as you grow through life, you become educated. And yet you're internally curious, and that you try to find things out, and you try to be better than you were the day before, and you have an achievement and a goal of where you're going, and you try to do something extraordinary. It's amazing the disconnect in the Grand Canyon of knowledge in this country between people that do and that have always done, and people who don't and that are critics. And here's the Great Equalizer, which is fucking nuts, is that a person who doesn't know science can basically blab all day long in a way that they have a louder voice than someone who knows 10 times more than they do. Now, regular people that are normal see a fucking idiot like that, and then they basically go, well, I'm going to ignore that guy because he's stupid. But at the same time, we have celebrated through social media morons. They don't know fucking anything. They don't, and this is what's so fucking crazy, is because I fell into this category myself, so I don't walk on water. I got burned, and that's what led me down this pathway to tell you what it is that I'm telling you. Okay? So in the United States, you have the ideal of separation of powers. You have 3 different branches of government that have 3 different absolutism, if you will, between the judiciary and the executive branch and the legislative branch. And they're all supposed to work in concert to basically, control over power, because the founders understood power. They understood that absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's why we had the fucking revolution. and then ultimately, that's why we had the Civil War, because all men are created equal. Martin Luther King said, I just want us to live up to what we put down on paper. Why would that be a great ask? See, I look at somebody like the Reverend Martin Luther King, and I think of him as a saint. I think of him as almost godlike. And I'm not Martin Luther King. I'll never be Martin Luther King because I don't have that kind of discipline. I don't have that kind of moral certitude. I mean, I do, but not in a way that would ever be able to be championed or in any way expressed through what felt to me like a vehicle for God. Okay? Because everything that Martin Luther King did seemingly made just absolute sense. Because what didn't make sense is the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, but then slavery. So those battles were won, okay? The civil rights movement came in. People didn't want to have nonstop war. They didn't want to have tyranny again in the 60s. And we came up with this sort of liberal democratic system. But yet there was always, and we've always had to have a profit motive. Because money is everything in American society, and quite frankly, global society. The only place it's not are in tribal societies where they live off the land, and they've done the same types of things for survivability and sustainability as they've done for hundreds of years. Who doesn't know that? Okay? But in American society, unless you're going to be off the grid on your own to build your own house, to hunt your own food, to create your own clothing, and find your own water, and to do that all by yourself 24/7, 365 days a year until you die because a bear mauled you when you were out trying to get water for your kid. That's the frontiersmen, right? Those people fought those battles. We're in 2022. And yet you have people, just like people who looked at the world and said it's flat, and they can't correlate, for example, with what I'm telling them, that the whole system's fucking corrupt. That absolute power corrupts absolutely. Just like Bastiat said, when a group of men discover plunder in society, they cultivate a legal system to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. What does that mean? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Okay, so these are all kind of shortcuts, right? But what is Patrick Lovell telling you? What has he been telling you? I went on a 13-year journey because I had my life buried in 2008 because, quite frankly, I was living the American dream. I had a young family. I just got married relatively at that time. I got married in 2001, 2002, 2001. 2001 I got married. And, my son was born in 2004. Got into my first house in 2004. And I was living the American dream. And the way I was looking at it at the time was like, okay, like everybody else. And I had income. And I had a six-figure income. So I could afford the loan that they provided me. And I understood the responsibility of paying that loan on time. But then the upheaval of 2008 happened. And it shot me, well, it happened in 2007, which destroyed the business I was working for. And I went independent. And I literally had a very, very wealthy guy, because I circulate amongst wealthy people, who was going to invest in my company on the day that Wall Street collapsed. I was about to go celebrate my 40th birthday down in South Beach with my wife, my beautiful family, my beautiful friends. I was going to live like, I was on top of the world, but God fucking taught me something else. He threw me in the desert without anything on my back, and I had to protect my family. I scrambled like I've never scrambled before in my entire life. But in doing so, it literally almost killed me. But I survived. It was like a test. And then I started to try to piece the puzzle together. And I did. And I went on this insane odyssey. And I keep telling you all the tricks of, like, for example, Donald Trump. Okay? He came up during this era of all of the stuff that I had to pull the thread on. And stuff that I had lived through, but I had only known through the periphery, because this isn't mainstream. Mainstream media doesn't tell you this stuff. Like I said in my Truth Bomb yesterday, the New York Times is literally the nation's paper of record. It's got the most credibility of any journalistic paper of record in the United States. But it's in the heart of the financial system. And so there is a cultural situation with the New York Times and Wall Street, where a lot of these guys grew up going to the same private schools, and then they came up, through the same Ivy League institutions, and then they become professionals, and then they're both scratching their heads like, okay, shit hit the fucking fan. All right, New York Times didn't do its fucking job. And because it didn't do its job, the rest of the country didn't do its job, because the professionals, the adults in the room who are tasked to make sure the system runs the way it's designed, failed. And that gave us what led to MAGA, and the MAGAs start to try to figure it out, and they start going, okay, well, it's deep state, and it becomes all these things through Q and everything else, which, by the way, through psychology becomes, if you have a vertical with white supremacy like the KKK, and then all the stuff that one of the most fascinating periods in history for me, and I know the rise of Hitler and the Third Reich as well as anyone. Okay, I know just about every detail of that time period and what led to what became. By the way, to all of those people who don't think of the climate change is real, do you think the Holocaust is real? Yeah, the Holocaust was real. Very much so. And it happened because, and this is always a shocker for me, that Hitler literally studied what came out of the era that was pre-Jim Crow in the American South, that were basically race laws that led to Jim Crow. And America First was a part of that in the KKK. That led to Hitler's Nuremberg laws that ultimately manifested the Holocaust. Okay? There was anti-Semitism in Europe going back 1,000 years. Okay? And there's a lot of stuff involved with banking, by the way, which is, of course, my focus in power. That's another story. But the details that I'm trying to get to is that we are in a situation where the powerful of this country, after 2008, which was a giant criminal racket, 9/11 happened, that helped spawn what was already underway in the housing market, that created this mammoth pipeline of fraud that destroyed the fucking global economy because of the way it's built. And when Humpty Dumpty came crashing down, these motherfuckers took out the biggest sweeper to bury the largest amount of fucking dirt and scum that you could possibly see, and innocent people, under the rug. And that's what created this madness that we're in. And they did it illegally. Look, I just got off the phone with somebody who was at the highest rungs of our government at that time period. And I just kind of, said this question to him. I'm like, dude, okay, am I seeing A correctly, B correctly, C correctly? And I get to the end of it, I'm like, how is this possible? And he basically summarized everything I just told you. He said, look, man, he who has the gold makes the rules. I've known that forever, okay? So those who are in charge of the financial system decided to do a quick turnaround using the full faith and credit of the United States that was earned because of our victory over fascism in World War II, where we became the global superpower that we are, and our economy is predicated on all sorts of commodities, all sorts of natural resources, all sorts of shit that's been built over centuries, okay? Blood and treasure. So it's real. Don't ever fucking think to yourself that they just digitize money out of fucking thin air that represents nothing. That's bullshit. It's real, and it's based on our fucking history. But what you got to understand is that because of our history and what we were, the people, the denizens of disaster, were able to go unprosecuted. What they chose was, because if they had to prosecute this whole situation, if they did that, then the power couldn't stay in power because they were all in on it. And the whole thing they thought was going to collapse. So what they figured was, you're stupid. We're going to use all of our media. We're going to fucking hide the fucking flag. We're going to pretend like what you all know is going on isn't happening. How many of you out there always say the system's corrupt and it's rigged, but yet you don't know what they did, and they knew you wouldn't do it? I'm not that kind of guy. I'm a guy that's got history of fucking solving problems, mammoth problems. So when it didn't add up for me, I figured out a way to figure it out. That doesn't make me smart. It makes me tenacious as fuck, I'll tell you that. And again, there are certain things that I'm actually as smart as pretty much anybody on, and that's the rise of the fucking Third Reich, first and foremost, okay? Which makes me really nervous about stuff that's going on right now. Trump is no Hitler. That doesn't mean that what's going on now doesn't lead to something that could lead to something really fucking cataclysmically wrong. And it'd be ironic if I played some sort of role in that, because I'm telling you the goddamn truth to all of those of you who are in power, because you know it. To all of you, here's the message to the New York Times and to everybody at the Federal Reserve and to everybody who basically covers for all of the situation that's happened in our financial markets, fuck you. I know what you did. And I have the evidence. What I don't have, thanks to you, is the bandwidth and the broadcast to be able to tell the millions of people that I've got the truth in a way that they're actually going to respond to. Now, like I just probably talked for 30 minutes, I guess. Yeah, 35 minutes now. Is anybody going to listen? I don't know. Maybe they did. Maybe we'll cut it up into segments and we'll see whether or not people pay attention. But I can tell you right now, to those still listening, and hopefully this manifests in some sort of edited version that Becky puts on TikTok. We need millions of Americans to wrap their head around the con at www.thecon.tv. Oh, and by the way, for those of you who are cheap bastards, I wanted to make this point, and I didn't even think about this before. But a lot of communists are like, hey, dude, if it's that important to you, why don't you make it for free? Well, first and foremost, we did make it for free, but not for you communists. We made it for free so that people who want to understand the truth, who don't have the money to be able to pay $10, even though I guarantee you they can find X amount of money to, like, subscribe to Netflix or HBO or whatever. But you can go to your library and download this at Hoopla, at Hoopla, and watch it for free. Okay? So take a little bit of initiative. If you want to understand the greatest criminal enterprise and cover-up in history that's created the world we live in, then I'm trying to tell you the emperor's no clothes and it's Humpty Dumpty. Okay? But the details. Now, to you communists, though, that are saying to me, hey, make it to us for free because you care about people or whatever your assumption is, right? Your assumption should be what I'm telling you. I believe in liberty and justice for all based on the integrity of law. Let the markets do what they do. Let people do what they do, and they figure it out. And you have to have a safety net, and you have to have empathy, and you have to have good graces because we are the richest country in the world. And you don't have to go hungry or, homeless. There should be opportunity for everyone, and that we should rehab people. That's my mindset. Because this is the other thing I know. For all of you who hate socialists, and I'm not talking communists, because communists and capitalists, quite frankly, I think are two peas of the pod. If you want to know the truth about absolute control, and same with fascists. But the real socialism here is what I'm telling you, okay? Because of Federal Reserve Act 13.3, we provided trillions of dollars of liquidity to the bastards that buried the fucking world, and they did it without any legal precedent. And the reason they were able to get away with it is nobody fucking challenged them. Nobody knew. Somebody had to have gotten the message to the mainstream media. Somebody had to get the message that to the New York Times that said, don't cover this. Don't ask questions. Let us do it. I'm still got huge questions about Obama and who he is, because I know he was certainly talking a good game before he became president, and then suddenly it all became about, his Healthcare Act, and, millions of people got fucking destroyed by this, even though the government provided $50 billion in assistance that got stolen and looted because we have that many criminals in our system through QE and everything else I've been trying to tell you. But the socialism is that. It's corporate fascism undergirded by a criminal syndicate. That's what it is technically. But the way they did that was they used the Federal Reserve to provide liquidity to institutions that were bankrupt. That's illegal. But the people and the power that constituted was our financial system. And they've got complete control. I spoke to a woman yesterday on somebody who's joining us to try to create, this huge movement of people to save the country and truth and democracy and to elevate this above all else. She told us her truth, and it was one of the most powerful things I've ever heard in my life. I know there's millions of people out there like that. I'm not the fucking Messiah. I don't pretend to be one. My favorite story in religion was Exodus and Moses and the Ten Commandments. That all makes sense to me. Actually, I love all of the antidotes from all the major religions, as well as those that aren't, monotheistic religions. I mean, you can learn a lot about religion and humanity and idea and spirituality across the board and everything else. I'm not God. I don't pretend to be. And God, what is God? God is, I mean, when you see these images come back from the Hubble, not Hubble, sorry, the James Webb Telescope into the far reaches of the universe that go back 13 billion years. I mean, it's extraordinary. But so is science, and so are how things work, and how things happen, and how things evolve. And so you want to be constantly curious about the world in which you live. But you got to get busy living, and you have to work within the system that you've got, and you got to play the cards that you're dealt. That's what I've done, and that's where I am. And I went the distance. I went the distance. Like Rocky. Maybe you could compare me to Rocky. Hopefully you could compare me to Rocky. I went the distance for liberty and justice for all. Because I fucking hate corruption. And I fucking hate liars. And I fucking hate deception. And I fucking hate evil. I hate it all. I believe in love, dignity, and quite frankly, beauty. I hate hatred. But I know I got to brawl with it. Because if you don't, evil flourishes when good men do nothing. Onwards and upwards.